The moment Sarah Fitzgerald's fingers closed around the loaf of bread, she knew her luck had run out. But the image of her 8-year-old sister's hollow cheeks and sunken eyes made her tighten her grip anyway. The shopkeeper's hand clamped down on her wrist before she could take another step. His weathered face twisted in anger as he shouted for the marshal in a voice that carried through the dusty streets of Moab, Utah Territory, on that scorching August afternoon in 1885. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as townspeople gathered to watch her humiliation unfold. She was 22 years old, dressed in a faded calico dress that had once belonged to her mother, and she had not eaten a full meal in 3 days. Her younger sister Emma waited at their makeshift camp outside town, too weak from hunger to walk the mile into Moab, trusting Sarah to bring back something, anything, to ease the gnawing emptiness in their bellies. The shopkeeper dragged her into the street, still gripping her wrist with surprising strength for a man his age. The stolen bread fell into the dirt, and Sarah watched it land with a desperation that made her throat tighten. Marshal Dawson arrived moments later, his silver star glinting in the harsh sunlight, his expression weary as he took in the scene. "Found her stealing, Marshal," the shopkeeper announced, his voice righteous with indignation. "Right out of my store. Brazen as you please." Sarah did not try to deny it. What would be the point? She had been caught red-handed, and lying would only make her punishment worse. She stood still, her chin lifted despite the shame burning through her chest, and met the marshal's gaze directly. "That true, miss?" Marshal Dawson asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Yes, sir," Sarah said quietly. "I was stealing bread. My sister is hungry. I have no money to pay for it." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some faces showed sympathy, others judgment, and still others simple curiosity at the spectacle. Sarah felt exposed under their collective scrutiny, but she refused to look away or show weakness. She and Emma had survived their parents' deaths 6 months ago, survived the journey west in a wagon train that had abandoned them when Sarah could not keep up the payments for their passage, and survived 3 weeks of living rough outside Moab while Sarah searched desperately for work. She would survive this too somehow. "How much was the bread worth, Fletcher?" the marshal asked the shopkeeper. 20 cents, Fletcher replied. "But it is the principle of the matter, Marshal. We cannot have thieves operating freely in this town." Before the marshal could respond, a man stepped forward from the crowd. Sarah had not noticed him before, but now she found it hard to look anywhere else. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin that spoke of years working outdoors. His dark hair fell to his collar beneath a worn Stetson, and his eyes were in startling shade of blue-green that reminded Sarah of the ocean she had seen once as a child. He wore dusty work clothes and scuffed boots, and there was something solid and capable about him that made her instinctively trust him, though she could not have said why. "I will pay the debt," the man said, his voice deep and calm. He pulled a coin from his pocket and held it out to Fletcher. 20 cents for the bread and another $1 for the trouble." Fletcher's eyes widened at the unexpected generosity, and he snatched the money quickly, as if afraid the stranger might change his mind. "Well, that is most generous of you, Mr. Kane, most generous indeed." Marshal Dawson looked between the stranger and Sarah, his expression thoughtful. "That settle the matter for you, Fletcher?" "I suppose it does," Fletcher admitted, though he still looked disgruntled. "Long as the debt is paid." The stranger, this Mr. Kane, bent down and retrieved the fallen bread from the dirt. He brushed it off carefully and held it out to Sarah. "I believe this belongs to you, miss." Sarah stared at the bread, then at the man, unable to quite believe what had just happened. "I cannot accept this," she said, though her fingers itched to take it. I have no way to repay you. Did I ask for repayment?" Kane's eyes held something that might have been amusement, though his expression remained serious. "Your sister is hungry. Take the bread." Pride warred with desperation in Sarah's chest, and desperation won as it had been winning for weeks now. She took the bread with trembling hands. "Thank you, sir. I am in your debt." "No debt," Kane said firmly. He glanced at the dispersing crowd, then back at Sarah. "Where are you staying?" Sarah hesitated. She did not want to admit that she and Emma had been sleeping under a canvas tarp stretched between two cottonwood trees along the creek, with nothing but their dead mother's quilts to cushion the hard ground. "We have a camp outside town." Kane's eyes narrowed slightly, and Sarah had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her evasion. "And where are your folks?" "Dead, sir. 6 months past. It was cholera that took them back in Missouri." Something shifted in Kane's expression, a flash of understanding or perhaps sympathy. "And you have been on your own since then? You and your sister?" "Yes, sir." Sarah straightened her shoulders, willing him to see that she was not looking for pity. "We manage well enough." "Managing well enough does not generally lead to stealing bread," Kane observed, but his tone held no judgment. "How old is your sister?" 8 years old, sir. Her name is Emma." Kane was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant, as if he were weighing something in his mind. Finally, he seemed to come to a decision. "I own a ranch about 5 miles east of here, the Circle K. I could use some help around the place, cooking, cleaning, mending, basic household work. Are you capable of such tasks?" Sarah's heart began to beat faster, but she tried not to let hope run away with her good sense. "Yes, sir. I am a fair cook, and I know how to keep a house." "The work comes with room and board for both you and your sister," Kane continued. "A cabin of your own, meals, and a small wage besides." "Does that interest you?" It was too good to be true. Sarah's experience had taught her that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. She studied Kane's face, searching for signs of improper intentions, but his expression remained neutral and businesslike. Still, she had to ask. "Why would you offer this to a complete stranger, sir? A thief, at that." "Because I need the help and you need the work," Kane said simply. "And because I know what it is to be hungry and desperate a long time ago. Consider it a fair exchange of labor for compensation, nothing more." Sarah wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. "I would need to see the accommodations first, sir. For my sister's safety and my own, you understand." "I would expect nothing less," Kane said, and this time there was definitely approval in his voice. "Fetch your sister and whatever belongings you have. I will wait here with my wagon. We can go to the ranch now, and if the arrangements do not suit you, I will bring you back to town before sundown. You have my word." Sarah searched his face one more time, looking for any hint of deception, but Kane met her gaze steadily, with nothing to hide. She found herself nodding before she had consciously decided to trust him. "I will get Emma. We will be back within the hour." She turned and hurried through the streets of Moab, clutching the bread to her chest, her mind racing. This could be the answer to their prayers, or it could be a terrible mistake. But what choice did she have? She could not let Emma starve, and she certainly could not stay in Moab after being publicly accused of theft, even if the debt had been paid. At least at a ranch, they would have a roof over their heads and food in their stomachs. The rest she would figure out as it came. Emma was exactly where Sarah had left her, huddled under the tarp, her small face pale and drawn. When she saw Sarah approaching with the bread, her eyes lit up with a joy that made Sarah's chest ache. "You got it," Emma breathed, reaching for the loaf. "I was so worried." "Wait," Sarah said gently, kneeling beside her sister. "Before you eat, I need to tell you something. We may have found a place to stay, a real place with a cabin and proper meals." Emma's eyes went wide. Truly, truly. But it is at a ranch, working for a man named Mr. Kane. He seems kind, but we must be careful. If anything seems wrong or unsafe, we will leave immediately. Do you understand? Emma nodded solemnly. I understand, but Sarah, anywhere has to be better than here. She was right, of course. Sarah helped Emma to her feet, and together they gathered their few possessions. The quilts, a change of clothes each, their mother's Bible, and the small wooden horse their father had carved for Emma. It all fit into a single canvas bag, a pitiful summary of their entire lives. They walked back to town together, Emma leaning heavily on Sarah's arm, her strength sapped by days of insufficient food. When they arrived at the mercantile, Kane was waiting exactly where he had promised, standing beside a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 horses. His expression softened when he saw Emma, and he immediately stepped forward to help her into the wagon bed, which he had lined with hay and a folded blanket. You can rest back here, little one, he said gently. It is a bit of a ride to the ranch. Emma looked up at him with wide, uncertain eyes, but she allowed him to lift her into the wagon. Sarah climbed up beside her, and Kane took the driver's seat, clicking his tongue to get the horses moving. As they rolled out of Moab, Sarah felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease slightly. Whatever was coming, at least they were moving forward instead of slowly starving. The landscape around them was harsh and beautiful in equal measure. Red rock formations jutted from the earth like ancient monuments, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty trail. But there was also a wild grandeur to it that Sarah could appreciate, a sense of space and possibility that she had never felt back in Missouri. Kane drove in silence for a while, then glanced back at them. There is water in the canteen beside you, and some jerky if you are hungry. Sarah found the canteen and helped Emma drink, then took a careful sip herself, trying not to guzzle it despite her thirst. The jerky was tough but flavorful, and Emma gnawed on it with the single-minded focus of a starving child. How long have you been in Moab? Kane asked, keeping his eyes on the trail ahead. 3 weeks, Sarah admitted. We arrived with almost nothing, and I have been trying to find work, but no one wants to hire a woman with a child to care for. They say I would be unreliable. That is foolish reasoning, Kane said flatly. A woman with a child to feed is the most reliable worker there is, in my experience. She has motivation to stay and do the job well. Sarah felt a rush of gratitude toward this stranger, who seemed to understand what so many others had failed to grasp. That was my thinking as well, sir, but thinking does not change minds that are already made up. They fell silent again, and Sarah watched the landscape change gradually as they left the immediate vicinity of town. Scrubland gave way to grassland, and she began to see cattle grazing in the distance, their forms dark against the golden grass. How many head do you run? Sarah asked, trying to gauge the size of the operation she might be working for. About 300 at present, Kane replied. It is a modest ranch, but it provides a living. I have 4 hands who work the cattle, and an older fellow named Jack who acts as foreman. You would not be expected to do anything with the livestock. Your work would be entirely domestic. That was a relief. Sarah knew nothing about cattle ranching and had no desire to learn. Keeping house, cooking, and cleaning were tasks she understood and could do well. And the cabin you mentioned. It is small but sturdy, Kane said. 2 rooms with a good stove and a real bed. It was built for a family that worked for my father years ago before he died. It has been empty for some time, but it is sound. You and your sister will have privacy and safety there. The way he said it, so matter-of-fact and straightforward, made Sarah want to believe him. They crested a rise, and suddenly the ranch spread out below them. The main house was a low, sprawling structure built of adobe and wood, with a covered porch running along the front. Several outbuildings dotted the property. A barn, a bunkhouse, a smokehouse, and set a little apart from the others, a small cabin that must be the one Kane had mentioned. "That is the Circle K," Kane said, and there was quiet pride in his voice. "It is not much, but it is mine, and I have worked hard to build it into something worthwhile." Sarah could see the evidence of that hard work everywhere she looked. The fences were in good repair, the buildings well maintained, and the land itself had a cared-for quality that spoke of attention and effort. It was far more than she had expected, and far more than she felt she deserved after being caught stealing. Kane drove the wagon directly to the small cabin and helped Emma down first, then offered his hand to Sarah. His grip was warm and calloused, the hand of a man who knew physical labor intimately. Sarah felt a strange flutter in her chest at the contact and quickly released his hand once she was on solid ground. "Let me show you inside," Kane said, producing a key from his pocket. He unlocked the door and pushed it open, revealing a simple but clean interior. The main room contained a table with 2 chairs, a small stove, and a comfortable-looking sofa. A doorway led to a second room where Sarah could see a bed and a washstand. "The bedroom has 1 bed at present," Kane explained. "But I can have another brought over from the main house, or you can share until we arrange something else. There is a pump outside for water, and firewood is kept in the shed behind the cabin. You are welcome to take meals at the main house if you prefer, or cook here for yourselves. Whatever suits you best." Emma walked into the cabin slowly, her eyes enormous, as if she could not quite believe this place might be theirs. She ran her hand along the back of the sofa, then looked at Sarah with an expression of such hope that Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "It is wonderful," Emma whispered. "Can we really stay here?" Kane knelt down so he was at eye level with Emma, a gesture that raised him considerably in Sarah's estimation. "You can stay here as long as your sister is willing to work for me. Is that something you would like?" Emma nodded vigorously. "Yes, please, I will be very good. I will help Sarah with everything." "I am sure you will," Kane said seriously, treating her words with the respect he might give an adult. He stood and looked at Sarah. "Does this arrangement meet with your approval?" Sarah looked around the cabin again, taking in the clean floor, the sturdy walls, the real glass in the windows. It was more than they had dared hope for in months. "Yes," she said, her voice catching slightly. "Yes, this will do very well. When would you like me to start work?" "Take today to settle in," Kane said. "Rest, eat, get your bearings. Tomorrow is soon enough to begin. I will have one of the hands bring over some supplies, food, firewood, linens for the bed. If you need anything else, you need only ask." He moved toward the door, then paused and turned back. "I should tell you so you do not hear it from someone else and think I kept it from you. My wife died 2 years ago. Fever took her and our unborn child with her. I have been alone since then, managing as best I can. That is why I need help with the house. I am not offering you charity, Miss Fitzgerald. I am offering you honest work because I genuinely need the help. I want you to understand that." Sarah's throat tightened at the pain she heard beneath his measured words. "I am sorry for your loss, Mr. Kane, and I do understand. I will earn my keep, I promise you that." Kane nodded once, then left, closing the door quietly behind him. Sarah and Emma stood in the center of their new home, hardly daring to move, as if the slightest motion might shatter the spell and reveal this all to be a dream. Then Emma threw her arms around Sarah's waist and burst into tears, all the fear and hunger and exhaustion of the past weeks pouring out in great, heaving sobs. Sarah held her tight, her own tears falling into Emma's tangled hair, and for the first time in a very long time, she allowed herself to believe that things might actually be all right. That first evening passed in a blur of simple comforts that felt like unimaginable luxuries. One of Kane's ranch hands, a young man named Peter, brought over a crate of supplies as promised: flour, salt, sugar, coffee, bacon, eggs, dried beans, and even a small jar of preserves. There were blankets and sheets that smelled of lavender, a bar of soap, and a lamp with plenty of oil. Sarah made a simple supper of bacon and eggs, and she and Emma ate until they were comfortably full for the first time in recent memory. They washed using the pump outside, marveling at the clear, cold water, then made up the bed with the clean linens. They decided to share the bed for now, taking comfort in each other's presence after so many uncertain nights. As darkness fell and Sarah tucked Emma in, her sister looked up at her with serious eyes. "Is Mr. Kane an angel, do you think?" Sarah smiled and brushed hair back from Emma's forehead. "I do not think angels wear cowboy boots and smell of cattle, but he is a good man, I believe. A very good man. We were fortunate that he was in town today. I will pray for him," Emma decided, "and for us that we can stay here forever." "That is a fine idea," Sarah agreed softly. "Now sleep. Tomorrow is a new beginning for us." Emma's eyes drifted closed almost immediately, her small body finally able to relax in safety and comfort. Sarah sat beside her for a long while, watching her sleep, feeling the enormity of what had happened today settle over her like a weight. They had been saved, quite literally, from starvation and homelessness. And all because Xavier Kane had chosen to step forward and pay a debt that was not his own. She thought about what he had told her, about his dead wife and child. The pain in his voice had been real and deep, despite his attempt to speak matter-of-factly. He was a man who had known loss, just as she had. Perhaps that was why he had helped her. Perhaps he had seen in her and Emma a reflection of his own suffering and had been moved to act. Whatever his reasons, Sarah was profoundly grateful, and she was determined to prove herself worthy of his trust. She would work harder than any housekeeper he had ever employed. She would make his home comfortable and his meals satisfying. She would show him that his faith in her had not been misplaced. With that resolution firm in her mind, Sarah finally allowed herself to lie down beside Emma. She was asleep within moments, her body surrendering to exhaustion, and for the first time in months her dreams were peaceful. Sarah woke at dawn the next morning, disoriented for a moment before memory flooded back. She was in the cabin. She and Emma were safe. She had a job. The relief was so intense it made her breath catch. She slipped out of bed carefully, trying not to wake Emma, and dressed in her better dress, the one that was only slightly faded and had no visible patches. She stepped outside into the cool morning air and looked around the ranch with fresh eyes. In the distance, she could see smoke rising from the chimney of the main house. The ranch hands were already moving about, tending to morning chores, and she could hear the lowing of cattle somewhere beyond the nearest rise. She used the pump to wash her face and hands, then went back inside to prepare herself properly. She brushed and braided her hair, pinched her cheeks to bring some color to them, and straightened her dress. When she felt as presentable as possible, she checked on Emma, who was still sleeping soundly, and decided to walk up to the main house to present herself for work. The main house was larger up close than it had seemed from a distance. Sarah approached the front door, then hesitated, unsure whether she should knock or go around to the back entrance as a servant might. Before she could decide, the door opened and Kane stood there, dressed in work clothes and holding a cup of coffee. "Miss Fitzgerald," he said, looking mildly surprised. "I did not expect you so early. Did you and your sister rest well?" "Very well, thank you, sir. I wanted to report for work and ask what you would have me do." Kane studied her for a moment, something that might have been approval flickering in his eyes. "Come in. We can discuss your duties over breakfast." Sarah followed him inside, her eyes adjusting to the dimmer interior. The house was spacious and well built, with good furniture and rugs on the floor, but it had an air of neglect that spoke of a man living alone. Dust gathered in corners, dishes were piled in the dry sink, and the whole place had a slightly stale smell that came from lack of regular airing and cleaning. The kitchen was large and well equipped, with a massive cast iron stove and plenty of storage. Kane gestured for her to sit at the table while he poured her a cup of coffee. "I usually eat with the hands in the bunkhouse," he explained. "Jack does most of the cooking there and he is adequate at it, but I confess I miss having proper meals. If you are willing, I would like you to prepare breakfast, dinner, and supper for me. For yourself and your sister as well, of course. You can cook here and we can take meals together, or you can prepare food and take it back to the cabin, whatever you prefer." The idea of eating 3 solid meals a day was almost overwhelming. "I am happy to cook for you, sir, and I think it would be easier to take meals here if that does not make you uncomfortable." "Why would it make me uncomfortable?" Kane asked, genuinely puzzled. "I am your employee, sir." "Some men prefer to maintain distance from their help." Kane shook his head. "I am not some fancy Eastern gentleman who needs servants kept out of sight. This is a working ranch and everyone here eats at the same table when it is practical. You are welcome in this house, Miss Fitzgerald. Please do not think otherwise." His directness was refreshing, and Sarah found herself relaxing slightly. "Then I will be happy to prepare meals here. What else would you have me do?" "The house needs a thorough cleaning," Kane admitted, looking around with a slight grimace. "I do what I can, but I am usually so tired at the end of the day that I barely manage to wash the dishes. The floors need scrubbing, the windows need washing, the linens need changing and washing. The usual household tasks. Also, my clothes and the hands' clothes could use mending. Jack does his best, but he is not skilled with a needle." "I can do all of that," Sarah assured him. "Would you like me to start today, if you are feeling up to it, but take your time settling in? There is no rush." They discussed the specifics of her duties while drinking coffee, and Sarah felt her confidence growing. These were tasks she knew well, tasks she could do competently. She would start with the kitchen, get breakfast prepared, then work her way through the rest of the house systematically. Kane finished his coffee and stood. "I need to get out to check on the herd. Help yourself to anything in the larder. If you need supplies from town, make a list and I will pick them up next time I go in." He paused at the door, his hat in his hands, and looked back at her. "Miss Fitzgerald, I want to say again that I am glad you and your sister are here. I know yesterday was difficult for you, but I hope you will come to think of this place as home." Before Sarah could respond, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. She sat alone in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around the warm coffee cup, and felt a rush of emotion she could not quite name. Gratitude, certainly, but something else too. Something that made her heart beat a little faster when she thought of the way Kane's eyes had held hers when he spoke. She pushed the feeling aside and stood up, ready to work. There would be time enough to examine her emotions later. For now, she had a job to do and a sister to care for, and she intended to excel at both. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Sarah woke early each morning and went to the main house to prepare breakfast. Kane usually joined her, and they would eat together while discussing the day ahead. Emma would wake later and come to the main house for her meal, and Sarah marveled at how quickly her sister's health improved with regular food and rest. Sarah threw herself into her work with determination. She scrubbed the house from top to bottom, washed every window until they gleamed, and laundered every piece of linen and clothing she could find. She cooked hearty meals that Kane praised sincerely, and she mended clothes until her fingers ached. The house began to smell of baking bread and furniture polish instead of dust and neglect, and Sarah took fierce pride in the transformation. Kane was unfailingly kind and respectful. He never made inappropriate comments or advances, never treated her as anything less than a valued employee. He asked about Emma's well-being, made sure they had everything they needed, and sometimes in the evenings, he would stop by the cabin to check on them or bring Emma a small gift. A ribbon from town, a smooth stone he had found, a carved wooden bird one of the hands had made. Sarah found herself looking forward to these visits more than she wanted to admit. Kane had a quiet strength about him that she found deeply attractive, though she tried not to let her mind wander in that direction. He was her employer, and she was his housekeeper. There was a proper order to such relationships, and she would be foolish to imagine otherwise. But there were moments when she caught him looking at her with an expression she could not quite read, moments when their hands brushed accidentally and neither of them pulled away immediately, moments when the air between them felt charged with something unspoken. One evening in early October, about 6 weeks after Sarah and Emma had arrived at the ranch, Kane invited them both to the main house for supper. It was not unusual. They often ate together, but tonight felt different somehow. Kane seemed restless, distracted, and Sarah noticed him watching her more than usual as she moved around the kitchen preparing the meal. Emma chattered happily about a bird's nest she had found, and Kane listened with apparent interest, asking questions that made Emma glow with importance. Sarah served the meal, a roasted chicken with vegetables and fresh bread, and they ate in companionable silence for a while. "Miss Fitzgerald," Kane said suddenly, setting down his fork, "I wonder if I might speak with you privately after supper. There is a matter I would like to discuss." Sarah's heart jumped, but she kept her voice calm. "Of course, Mr. Kane." After the meal, Emma returned to the cabin to read by lamplight, a luxury she never tired of, and Sarah stayed behind to clean up. Kane helped her, drying dishes as she washed them, something he often did despite her protests that it was her job. When the last dish was put away, Kane turned to face her, his expression serious. "I want to thank you for everything you have done these past weeks. This house feels like a home again, and that is entirely due to your efforts." "You are very welcome, sir. I am happy to be useful." "You are more than useful," Kane said quietly. "You have brought life back to this place, light and warmth and the sound of laughter." I had forgotten what that felt like. Sarah's breath caught at the intensity in his voice. "Mr. Kane." "Xavier," he interrupted gently. "I would like it if you called me Xavier. Mr. Kane sounds too formal for what I consider us to have become." "I am not sure that would be proper," Sarah said, though her heart was beating fast. "Propriety be damned," Xavier said, then immediately looked contrite. "Forgive my language. But Sarah, I find myself caring less and less about what is proper and more about what is true. And the truth is that I have developed feelings for you, deep feelings. I did not intend for this to happen, and I will understand if you find it unwelcome, but I cannot keep silent any longer." Sarah stared at him, her mind reeling. She had allowed herself to notice her own growing attraction to Xavier, but she had never imagined he might feel the same way. "You have feelings for me," she repeated faintly. "Yes." Xavier stepped closer, his eyes searching her face. "I admire your strength, your devotion to your sister, your kindness and competence. I find myself thinking about you constantly, looking for excuses to be near you. This past month has been the happiest I have been since before Clara died, and I know that is because of you. Clara, his late wife." Sarah felt a pang of uncertainty. Are you sure you are not simply lonely, that you are not confusing gratitude with affection? I am sure, Xavier said firmly. I have been lonely for 2 years, and I did not develop feelings for any of the other women in Moab, despite their families' best efforts to throw us together. This is not loneliness talking, Sarah. This is me, telling you that I am falling in love with you and asking if there is any chance you might feel the same. Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the dry sink. Everything in her life had been so uncertain for so long. Could she trust this? Could she trust him? But when she looked into Xavier's eyes, she saw nothing but sincerity and hope and a vulnerability that made her heart ache. I do feel the same, she whispered. I have been trying to maintain proper boundaries, but yes, I have feelings for you too. The relief that flooded Xavier's face was almost comical. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding and smiled, a genuine, brilliant smile that transformed his usually serious expression. You have no idea how glad I am to hear you say that. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and rough against her softer skin, and Sarah felt the touch all the way to her core. I do not want to rush you, Xavier said. I know your life has been difficult, and you need stability, not upheaval. But I want to court you properly, Sarah. With your permission, I would like to see if what we have between us can grow into something lasting. My permission is gladly given, Sarah said, and felt a smile break across her own face. Though I confess I do not know much about courting, I have never been courted before. Then we will figure it out together, Xavier said. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so tender and old-fashioned that Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. They stood there in the quiet kitchen, hands clasped, and Sarah felt as if the world had shifted on its axis. This morning she had been a housekeeper, an employee, a woman grateful for charity. Tonight she was a woman being courted by a man she admired, a man she was beginning to love. The transformation was dizzying. I should go, Sarah said reluctantly. Emma will wonder where I am. Will you tell her? Xavier asked. Sarah considered. I think I must. She deserves to know that things are changing, but I will make sure she understands that nothing is certain yet, that we are simply seeing where this might lead. Whatever you think is best, Xavier agreed. He walked her to the door, still holding her hand, unwilling to let go. Sleep well, Sarah. You too, Xavier. His name felt strange on her tongue, intimate and thrilling. She walked back to the cabin in a daze, her hand still warm from his touch. When she entered, Emma looked up from her book with a curious expression. You were gone a long time. Is everything all right? Sarah sat down beside her sister on the sofa and took a deep breath. Everything is very all right, but I need to tell you something. Mr. Kane, Xavier, has asked permission to court me, and I have said yes. Emma's eyes went wide. Court you? Like to be married? Eventually, perhaps, Sarah said carefully, if things go well between us. But for now, we are simply getting to know each other better. Would you be comfortable with that? Emma was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she said, I like Xavier. He is kind and he makes you smile. I think it would be nice if he courted you. And if you got married, we could stay here forever, couldn't we? That is not the reason to marry someone, Sarah said gently. But yes, if things progress that far, we would be able to stay. Then I hope things progress, Emma said firmly. Because I love it here and I love you, and I think Xavier could love you too. Maybe he already does. Sarah hugged her sister close, overwhelmed by Emma's simple wisdom. Maybe he does. And maybe I already love him too, but we will take our time and be sure. All right, Emma agreed. Then she grinned. But I still hope you get married. I have always wanted to be a bridesmaid. Over the following weeks, Xavier courted Sarah with a combination of old-fashioned chivalry and practical ranch life realities that she found endearing. He brought her wildflowers he picked while checking the herd. He sat with her on the porch of the main house in the evenings, talking about their lives and dreams and losses. He included Emma in many of their outings, taking them both into Moab for supplies and letting Emma pick out peppermint sticks at the mercantile. Sarah learned more about Xavier's past during these conversations. He had built the Circle K from almost nothing, working as a ranch hand for years to save enough money to buy the land. His wife, Clara, had been the daughter of a neighboring rancher, and their marriage had been both a love match and a practical alliance. Her death had devastated him, and he had thrown himself into work to avoid facing his grief. "I thought I would never feel anything again," Xavier admitted one evening as they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. "I thought that part of me had died with Clara, but then you came into my life, and everything changed." "I am not trying to replace her," Sarah said quietly. "I hope you know that." "You are not replacing her," Xavier assured her. "You are writing a new chapter. That is different. Clara will always be part of my past, but you are my present and I hope my future." Sarah leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, and allowed herself to imagine that future. It looked bright and full of possibility. As winter approached, the ranch settled into the slower rhythms of the cold season. The cattle had been moved to winter pastures, and there was less daily work, which meant Xavier spent more time around the house. He and Sarah fell into an easy partnership, working side by side on various projects, and their affection deepened with each passing day. On a cold evening in late November, Xavier invited Sarah to the main house after Emma had gone to bed. When she arrived, she found the kitchen table set for two, with candles burning and a bottle of wine beside the plates. "What is this?" Sarah asked, surprised and pleased. "A proper courting dinner," Xavier said, looking almost nervous. "I know we have been taking our time, but I wanted to do something special for you." The meal was simple but delicious, beef stew with fresh bread, and they ate slowly, talking and laughing. When they finished, Xavier stood and held out his hand. "Dance with me," he said. "There is no music," Sarah pointed out, but she took his hand anyway. "Then we will make our own," Xavier said, and began to hum a slow waltz as he pulled her into his arms. They moved together in the candle-lit kitchen, swaying gently to Xavier's humming, and Sarah felt a happiness so complete it almost frightened her. This was what she had always dreamed of, though she had never dared to hope it might be hers. A good man who loved her, a home, security, and most of all, the feeling of being treasured. When the dance ended, Xavier cupped her face in his hands and looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I love you, Sarah Fitzgerald. I love you with everything I am. I need you to know that." "I love you too," Sarah whispered. "So much it scares me sometimes." "Do not be scared," Xavier said softly. Then he leaned down and kissed her, slow and gentle and perfect. It was Sarah's first real kiss, and it felt like coming home. She melted into it, her hands gripping Xavier's shoulders, and for a moment the entire world consisted of just the two of them and the love flowing between them. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Sarah. I know we have only been courting for a short time, but I am certain of my feelings. I want you to be my wife. I want Emma to be part of our family officially. I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. Please say yes." Sarah's heart felt like it might burst. "Yes," she said, laughing through sudden tears. "Yes, Xavier, I will marry you. Nothing would make me happier." Xavier kissed her again, deeper this time, and Sarah gave herself over to it completely, all her doubts and fears melting away. She was going to marry this man. She was going to be Sarah Kane. She and Emma were going to have a real home and a real family. They sat together for hours that night, making plans and dreaming aloud. They decided to marry in the spring, giving Sarah time to prepare and allowing Xavier to prove to himself and everyone else that this was not a hasty decision born of loneliness. They would have a simple ceremony in Moab, with the ranch hands and a few townspeople as witnesses. Emma would indeed be a bridesmaid or perhaps a flower girl, whichever she preferred. When Sarah finally returned to the cabin, she found Emma still awake, reading by lamplight. The moment Emma saw her face, she knew. "He proposed," Emma said, sitting up straight. "And you said yes." "I said yes," Sarah confirmed, and Emma let out a whoop of joy and launched herself at Sarah, hugging her so tight it hurt. "I knew it," Emma crowed. "I knew he would ask and you would say yes. Oh, Sarah, we are going to have a real family again." They stayed up late into the night, Emma peppering Sarah with questions about the proposal and the wedding plans, and Sarah answering as best she could through her happiness. When Emma finally fell asleep, Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hardly able to believe that her life had changed so dramatically in just a few short months. She had been a thief, caught and humiliated in the street. Now she was a woman engaged to be married to a good, honorable man who loved her. It felt like a miracle, and Sarah sent up a silent prayer of thanks to whatever force had guided Xavier into that street on the day she needed him most. Winter settled over the ranch like a blanket, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. Sarah and Xavier's relationship deepened during those quiet months. They spent hours together in the warm kitchen, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's habits and preferences, building the foundation for a lifetime together. Xavier insisted on giving Sarah a proper engagement ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond that he had ridden all the way to the larger town of Grand Junction to purchase. When he slipped it on her finger, Sarah cried, overwhelmed by the tangible symbol of his commitment. The ranch hands took the news of their engagement with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Jack, the foreman, clapped Xavier on the back and told him he was a lucky man. Peter, the young hand who had brought supplies to Sarah's cabin that first day, grinned and said he had known it would happen from the moment Xavier paid Sarah's debt. The other hands offered their congratulations and seemed genuinely happy for them. In town, the reaction was more mixed. Some people, particularly those who had witnessed Sarah's theft and public humiliation, were surprised that Xavier would choose to marry someone with such a recent scandal attached to her name. But Xavier met any criticism with a cold stare and a flat statement that his choice of bride was no one's business but his own. Fletcher, the shopkeeper, had the audacity to comment that Xavier could surely do better than a thief. Xavier responded by closing his account at Fletcher's store and moving his business to the competing mercantile, and within a week, several other ranchers had followed suit, unwilling to patronize a man who had offended Xavier Kane. Fletcher came around to apologize, but Xavier accepted it coolly and did not move his business back. Sarah was touched by Xavier's fierce defense of her honor, even as she tried to convince him that she did not need him to fight her battles. "I am perfectly capable of handling ignorant gossip," she told him. "I know you are," Xavier replied, "but you should not have to. You are going to be my wife, and I will not tolerate anyone speaking poorly of you." As spring approached, wedding preparations began in earnest. Sarah sewed herself a dress from fabric Xavier bought for her, a soft blue calico that brought out her eyes. Emma would wear a new dress too, yellow with white trim, and Sarah had never seen her sister so excited about anything. They set the date for the last Saturday in April, when the weather would be mild and the ranch work relatively light. Sarah sent word to the minister in Moab, who agreed to perform the ceremony at the small church on the edge of town. The week before the wedding, Sarah was overcome with nerves. Everything was happening so fast, even though they had been engaged for months. Was she ready for this? Was she truly prepared to be Xavier's wife in all the ways that entailed? Xavier seemed to sense her anxiety. He found her in the kitchen the evening before the wedding, standing at the window and staring out at the darkening sky. Having second thoughts, he asked gently, coming to stand beside her. Not second thoughts, Sarah said slowly. Just nervousness. This is all so new to me, Xavier. I have never been married. I have never even been properly courted until you. What if I am not a good wife? What if I disappoint you? Xavier turned her to face him, his hands warm on her shoulders. Sarah, listen to me. You have already proven yourself to be strong, capable, kind, and resilient. You have run my household flawlessly for months. You have been a loving guardian to your sister. You have faced hardship with grace and dignity. How could you possibly disappoint me? Marriage is more than running a household, Sarah said, her cheeks flushing. There are other aspects, intimate aspects, and I know nothing about any of that. Understanding dawned in Xavier's eyes and his expression softened. We will learn together. I promise to be patient and gentle. I would never pressure you or make you uncomfortable. We have the rest of our lives to figure out the intimate side of marriage, and we will do it at whatever pace feels right to you. His reassurance calmed her fears, and Sarah leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. I love you so much. I cannot wait to be your wife. And I cannot wait to call you my wife, Xavier murmured into her hair. Tomorrow, Sarah, tomorrow everything becomes official. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, with a bright blue sky and a warm breeze that felt like a blessing. Sarah woke early, too excited to sleep, and spent extra time preparing herself. She bathed in the wooden tub they had dragged into the cabin, washed her hair until it shone, and carefully donned her new blue dress. Emma helped her arrange her hair, pinning it up in a style that was both elegant and simple. When Sarah looked at herself in the small mirror, she hardly recognized the woman looking back. Gone was the desperate, half-starved creature who had been caught stealing bread. In her place was a woman glowing with health and happiness, her eyes bright with love and anticipation. You look beautiful, Emma breathed. Xavier is going to fall over when he sees you. Sarah laughed. I hope not. That would be an unfortunate start to the ceremony. Xavier had arranged for a wagon to take them into town, driven by Jack, who had agreed to give Sarah away since she had no male relative to perform the duty. Emma rode in the back, clutching a small bouquet of spring flowers she had gathered that morning. The little church was already filling with people when they arrived. Sarah was surprised to see how many had come. Not just the ranch hands, but several neighboring ranchers and their families, townspeople she recognized from the mercantile, and even Marshall Dawson, who had been present on that fateful day when Sarah was caught stealing. Xavier stood at the front of the church with the minister, dressed in his best suit, his hair neatly combed and his face freshly shaved. When he saw Sarah coming down the aisle on Jack's arm, his expression transformed into something that made Sarah's heart skip. It was wonder and love and profound happiness all rolled together, and she knew she would remember that look for the rest of her life. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. Sarah and Xavier spoke their vows clearly and firmly, their voices ringing with conviction. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and invited Xavier to kiss his bride, Xavier cupped Sarah's face gently and kissed her with such tender reverence that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. The reception was held at the church hall, with food provided by various neighbors as wedding gifts. There was music and dancing, and Sarah found herself whirled from one partner to another, as the ranch hands all insisted on a dance with the bride. But always her eyes sought out Xavier, and always he was watching her, his gaze warm and possessive in the best possible way. As evening fell and the celebration began to wind down, Xavier caught Sarah's hand and pulled her outside into the cool dusk. They stood together under the vast expanse of stars, and Xavier wrapped his arms around his wife, still marveling at the word. "Hello, Mrs. Kane," he murmured. "Hello, Mr. Kane," Sarah replied, smiling. "Or should I call you husband now?" "Call me whatever you like, as long as you never stop saying my name in that tone of voice." They rode back to the ranch together, Emma dozing in the back of the wagon, exhausted from the excitement of the day. Xavier had arranged for Emma to sleep in the main house tonight, in the room that would now officially be hers, giving him and Sarah privacy in the cabin on their wedding night. Sarah's nervousness returned as they approached the cabin, but Xavier seemed to sense it. He helped her down from the wagon with extra care and then simply held her for a long moment. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for," he reminded her. "We can just sleep if that is what you prefer." But Sarah shook her head. "I am ready. I want to be your wife in every way. I am just a little scared because I do not know what to expect." "Then let me show you," Xavier said softly. "And I promise there is nothing to fear." He carried her over the threshold of the cabin, a tradition that made Sarah laugh despite her nerves. Inside, he set her down gently and lit a lamp, casting a warm glow over the room. Then he took his time, unbuttoning her dress with patient fingers, kissing her tenderly, murmuring words of love and reassurance that gradually eased away her anxiety. What followed was tender and sweet and occasionally awkward in the way of first times. But Xavier was true to his word, patient and gentle, guiding Sarah through the newness of physical intimacy with care. And when it was over and they lay together in the darkness, Sarah felt a completion she had never known before, a sense of truly belonging to someone and having them belong to her in turn. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Xavier replied, pulling her closer. "My wife. My Sarah." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and Sarah's last conscious thought was that she had finally, truly come home. The months following the wedding were a period of adjustment and deepening love. Sarah moved her few possessions into the main house, and Emma took over the cabin as her own space, though she spent most of her time in the main house with Sarah and Xavier. The three of them became a family unit, eating meals together, working together, and spending evenings together in comfortable companionship. Sarah had worried that becoming Xavier's wife might change the easy friendship they had developed, but if anything, marriage strengthened their bond. They learned each other's rhythms and moods, developed private jokes and small rituals that belonged only to them, and discovered that they genuinely enjoyed each other's company both in and out of the bedroom. The physical side of their marriage, which had been such a source of nervousness for Sarah initially, became a source of joy and connection. Xavier was an attentive lover who took pleasure in Sarah's pleasure, and Sarah found herself responding to him with a passion she had not known she possessed. By midsummer, Sarah began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Xavier, afraid to get his hopes up only to be disappointed. But when her monthly courses failed to arrive for the third time and she began experiencing morning nausea, she could no longer deny the signs. She told him one evening after supper, when Emma had gone to bed and they were alone in their bedroom. "Xavier, I have something to tell you. I am with child. We are going to have a baby." Xavier froze, his expression unreadable, and for a terrible moment Sarah feared she had made a mistake in telling him. Then his face crumpled and he pulled her into his arms, his body shaking with emotion. "A baby," he choked out. "Sarah, truly." "Truly," she confirmed, holding him tight. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not begin to cover it," Xavier said, pulling back to look at her, his eyes wet with tears. "After I lost Clara and our baby, I thought I would never have another chance at fatherhood, and now you are giving me that chance. Sarah, I cannot even put into words what this means to me." They held each other for a long time, both crying and laughing at the same time, overwhelmed by the miracle of new life. When they finally pulled apart, Xavier insisted that Sarah sit down while he fetched her water, already falling into the protective mode that would only intensify over the coming months. Emma was thrilled when they told her the news the next morning. "I am going to be an aunt," she squealed, dancing around the kitchen. "Well, not really an aunt. What would I be? A sister to the baby, I suppose. Oh, this is wonderful." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and as Sarah's belly grew, Xavier became increasingly attentive and protective. He insisted she rest more and work less, took over many of the heavier household tasks himself, and brought her small treats from town to satisfy her various cravings. Sarah protested that she was perfectly capable of continuing her normal work, but she was secretly touched by his concern. In February of 1887, on a cold night with wind howling outside, Sarah went into labor. Xavier sent one of the hands racing to town to fetch the midwife while he stayed with Sarah, holding her hand and offering what comfort he could. Emma stayed nearby, heating water and gathering clean linens, trying to be helpful despite her own nervousness. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. There were moments when Sarah thought she could not endure another contraction, moments when she wondered if she would survive this ordeal. But Xavier never left her side, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement, and anchoring her to the world when the pain threatened to drag her under. Finally, as dawn broke on the second day, the baby came into the world with a loud, angry cry that made everyone in the room laugh with relief. The midwife cleaned the infant and wrapped it in a soft blanket before placing the bundle in Sarah's arms. "You have a son," the midwife announced with a smile. Sarah looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and perfect, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. Xavier leaned over her shoulder, staring at his son with an expression of absolute wonder. "A boy," he breathed. "We have a son, Sarah." "What will we name him?" Sarah asked, too exhausted to think clearly. Xavier was quiet for a moment, then said, "I would like to name him Thomas after my father. Thomas Xavier Kane, if that meets with your approval." "Thomas," Sarah repeated, testing the name. "Yes, that is perfect." Emma crept closer to peek at her new nephew, her eyes wide with fascination. "He is so small." "Are you sure he is supposed to be that small? He will grow," the midwife assured her. "Give him a few months, and you will be complaining that he is too heavy to carry." Over the following weeks, the household adjusted to the presence of baby Thomas. He was a demanding infant, crying frequently and sleeping in short bursts, but no one minded. Xavier was completely besotted with his son, spending hours just watching him sleep or holding him against his chest while he did paperwork. Emma proved to be a devoted and helpful older sister, singing to Thomas when he fussed and helping Sarah with small tasks. Sarah herself was exhausted but happier than she had ever been. Looking around at her family, her husband and sister and son, all gathered in the home that had once seemed like an impossible dream, she sometimes had to pinch herself to make sure it was real. One evening in early spring, when Thomas was about 6 weeks old and sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Xavier pulled Sarah onto the porch to watch the sunset. They sat together on the swing he had hung there, moving gently back and forth, and Xavier wrapped his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "Do you remember the day we met?" he asked suddenly. "Of course," Sarah said. "I was caught stealing bread, not exactly my finest moment." "I knew that day that there was something special about you," Xavier said. "The way you held your head up despite your humiliation. The way you admitted your guilt but did not apologize for trying to feed your sister. You were fierce and proud and desperate, and I could not walk away." "I am glad you did not," Sarah said softly. "You saved my life that day, Xavier. Mine and Emma's both." "You saved mine too," Xavier replied. "I was just existing before you came here, going through the motions of living without really feeling anything. You brought me back to life, Sarah. You and Emma and now Thomas. You gave me a family and a reason to care about the future." Sarah turned to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they pulled apart, she said, "I never imagined that getting caught stealing would turn out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. But it brought me to you, and that makes everything worth it." They sat together until full dark, talking quietly about their plans and dreams, while inside the house Emma sang a lullaby to baby Thomas, and the ranch settled into peaceful night. It was not a grand life or a glamorous one, but it was theirs, built on love and second chances and the willingness to take a risk on each other. As the years passed, the Kane family continued to grow and thrive. Thomas was joined by a daughter 2 years later, a little girl they named Caroline after Sarah's mother, and then another son 3 years after that, whom they named Samuel. The house was always full of noise and laughter, and Sarah sometimes marveled at how different her life had turned out from what she had expected. Emma grew into a beautiful young woman and eventually married one of the neighboring ranchers' sons, settling on a property just a few miles from the Circle K. She and Sarah remained close, visiting each other frequently and raising their children together as cousins who were more like siblings. The ranch prospered under Xavier's careful management, growing from a modest operation to one of the most successful spreads in the territory. But Xavier never let success change him. He remained the same steady, hard-working man Sarah had fallen in love with, devoted to his family, and committed to treating everyone fairly. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier took Sarah back to the spot where they had first met in Moab. The town had grown over the years, but the mercantile was still there, though now run by Fletcher's son after Fletcher himself had retired. "I want to buy you bread," Xavier said with a slight smile. "Properly this time." Sarah laughed and took his hand. "I think I can afford to buy my own bread these days, but I appreciate the gesture." They walked into the store together, and Xavier insisted on purchasing an entire loaf of fresh bread, which he presented to Sarah with mock ceremony. "For you, my love, may you never have to steal bread again." "With you beside me, I will never have to," Sarah said, and kissed him right there in the store, not caring who might be watching. They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, driving through land that was intimately familiar to them both now. The main house came into view, lights glowing in the windows, and Sarah could see their children playing in the yard while Emma's oldest daughter watched over them. "This is everything I ever wanted," Sarah said quietly. "A home, a family, a man who loves me. I have been so blessed, Xavier." "We have both been blessed," Xavier corrected. "You could have walked away that first day. You could have decided I was not to be trusted and taken Emma somewhere else. But you gave me a chance, and that chance turned into the greatest gift of my life." He helped her down from the wagon, and they walked hand in hand toward the house, toward the sounds of their children laughing and the warm glow of home. It had all started with a loaf of stolen bread, and a man willing to pay a debt that was not his own, and it had grown into a love story that would sustain them for the rest of their lives. Years continued to roll by with the steady rhythm of ranch life marking time. The children grew taller and stronger, each developing their own personality and interests. Thomas, as the eldest, took naturally to ranch work and could often be found shadowing his father from dawn to dusk, learning everything Xavier had to teach about cattle and land management. Caroline was quieter but fiercely intelligent, devouring every book she could get her hands on and declaring her intention to become a teacher someday. Little Samuel was still young enough to be more interested in catching frogs and climbing trees than thinking about his future. But he had his father's steady temperament and his mother's kind heart. Sarah's days were full but satisfying, managing the household and raising the children while still finding time to help Emma with her own growing brood. The two sisters remained each other's closest confidante, and Sarah often reflected on how miraculous it was that they had both found happiness after such a desperate beginning. On quiet evenings, when the children were in bed and the ranch was still, Sarah and Xavier would sit together on the porch they both loved, talking or simply enjoying the comfortable silence that comes from years of true partnership. These were the moments Sarah treasured most, the peaceful interludes that reminded her how far they had come together. One such evening, when they had been married nearly 15 years, Xavier surprised Sarah with a gift. It was a locket, delicate gold with a clasp that opened to reveal two tiny photographs, one of Sarah and one of their 3 children together. "I know we have never been fancy people," Xavier said as he fastened it around her neck. "But I wanted you to have something that showed how much you mean to me. You are the center of everything, Sarah. Our family revolves around you." Sarah touched the locket with trembling fingers, overcome with emotion. "I do not need jewelry to know I am loved. You show me every single day." "I know," Xavier said, "but I wanted you to have this anyway. When we are old and the children are grown and gone, I want you to be able to look at this and remember these years when our house was full of noise and chaos and love." The mention of growing old together filled Sarah with a warm contentment. They were not old yet, only in their late 30s, but she liked the certainty in Xavier's voice when he spoke of their future. He had never given her reason to doubt his commitment, and she knew he never would. As their children entered adolescence, new challenges arose. Thomas, at 16, began expressing interest in expanding the ranch's operations, wanting to try new breeding techniques he had read about. Xavier listened to his ideas with respect, implementing some and gently explaining why others might not work, treating his son as a junior partner rather than simply a child. Sarah loved watching them work together, seeing so much of Xavier in their son's earnest intensity and careful planning. Caroline, at 14, had indeed pursued her dream of teaching. She had begun helping the schoolteacher in Moab, which had grown into a real town with proper buildings and even a railroad connection. The young teacher had recognized Caroline's gift for explaining things clearly and had taken her on as an assistant. Caroline would come home glowing with excitement, telling her parents about the children she had helped that day, and Sarah knew her daughter had found her calling. Samuel, now 11, was still working out who he was meant to be, but he had a gift with horses that surprised everyone. The most skittish mount would calm under his hands, and Xavier had begun letting him take charge of breaking and training the ranch's horses. It was important work, and Samuel took it seriously, spending hours in the corral with infinite patience. Emma's children were growing as well, and the combined families made for lively gatherings during holidays and celebrations. The Circle K had become the center of a sprawling extended family, and Sarah took great pride in maintaining the traditions that made everyone feel welcome and loved. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Xavier arranged for Emma to watch the children so he could take Sarah on a trip. They traveled to Salt Lake City, which Sarah had never seen, and spent 3 days exploring the growing city, staying in a real hotel and eating meals someone else had cooked. It was strange and wonderful to be alone together without the demands of the ranch and children, and they fell in love with each other all over again, remembering what it had been like when they were courting. On the train ride home, Sarah rested her head on Xavier's shoulder and said, "Thank you for this. I did not realize how much I needed time away until I had it." "We should do this more often," Xavier replied. "The ranch will not fall apart without us for a few days, and I like having you all to myself." "I like it too," Sarah admitted. "Though I confess I am eager to see the children again. Is that terribly boring of me?" "It is one of the things I love most about you," Xavier said, kissing her forehead. "You are such a devoted mother. Our children are lucky to have you." "They are lucky to have both of us," Sarah corrected. "You are a wonderful father, Xavier, patient and kind but firm when you need to be." I could not ask for a better partner in raising them. The train carried them back toward Moab, back toward home and family and the life they had built together. As the familiar red rock formations came into view, Sarah felt the rightness of it settle over her like a warm blanket. This was where she belonged. This was home. More years passed, marked by the usual mixture of joy and sorrow that makes up any life. Xavier's foreman Jack passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, and they buried him on the ranch with full honors, remembering the faithful service he had given for so many years. Thomas took over many of Jack's responsibilities, having grown into a capable 20-year-old who ran the ranch hands with his father's firm but fair leadership style. Caroline married a young lawyer from Salt Lake City, a good man who respected her intelligence and supported her continued teaching. Sarah cried at the wedding, overcome with emotion at seeing her daughter so happy and so loved, remembering her own wedding day and how nervous and hopeful she had been. Samuel discovered a talent for breeding horses and began developing a reputation throughout the territory for producing quality stock. He was only 16 but already fielding orders from ranchers several counties away, and Xavier beamed with pride at his youngest son's entrepreneurial spirit. Emma's family continued to thrive as well, and Sarah counted it among her greatest blessings that she got to watch her sister live a happy, secure life. Emma's husband treated her well. Her children were healthy and good-hearted, and Emma herself had grown into a confident, capable woman who bore no resemblance to the frightened, starving 8-year-old Sarah had tried to steal bread for all those years ago. On quiet afternoons, Sarah sometimes thought about that day, about the desperation that had driven her to theft and the miracle that had followed. She thought about Xavier stepping forward from the crowd, a stranger willing to show mercy to someone who had nothing to offer in return. That single act of kindness had changed the trajectory of 2 lives, creating ripples that spread outward to touch dozens of others. When Sarah mentioned this to Xavier, he shook his head gently. "You give me too much credit. I paid 20 cents for a loaf of bread. You did all the hard work after that. You built this life we have, Sarah. Your strength, your love, your devotion to family. I just gave you an opportunity. You made everything else happen." "We made it happen," Sarah insisted. "Together. That is how it has always been with us." As they entered their 40s and then their 50s, Xavier's hair went silver at the temples and Sarah found laugh lines forming at the corners of her eyes. They moved a little slower on cold mornings, and Xavier sometimes needed help with tasks that had once been easy. But the love between them remained as strong as ever, perhaps even stronger for having weathered the trials of 2 decades together. Their grandchildren began arriving, first from Caroline, and then eventually from Thomas, when he married a rancher's daughter from the next county. Sarah embraced her new role as grandmother with the same devotion she had brought to motherhood, and the house once again filled with the sounds of young children. Emma became a grandmother around the same time, and the two sisters would sit together watching their grandchildren play, marveling at how life had turned out. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if Xavier had not been in town that day?" Emma asked once. "Sometimes," Sarah admitted. "But not often. I prefer to focus on what did happen rather than what might have been. We were blessed, Emma. Against all odds and logic, we were blessed." "We were," Emma agreed. "And it all started because you were brave enough to try to save me, even if it meant stealing." "I have never forgotten that, Sarah. I owe you everything." "You owe me nothing," Sarah said firmly. "You are my sister. I would have done anything for you then, and I would do anything for you now. That is what family means." Samuel eventually married as well, choosing a girl from Moab who shared his love of horses, and he built a house on the far edge of the Circle K property. Xavier deeded him a portion of the land, ensuring that all three of his children would have security and a stake in the ranch that had supported them. As Sarah approached her 60th birthday, she found herself reflecting more and more on the journey that had brought her to this place. She had lived a long, full life, far beyond what she had dared hope for during those dark days when she and Emma were starving outside Moab. She had known love and security, had raised children and seen them safely into adulthood, had built something lasting and good. Xavier, now 62, had slowed down considerably, leaving most of the active ranch management to Thomas while he took on an advisory role. But he was still strong and vital, still the steady presence that had anchored Sarah's life for so many years. One evening in late spring, they sat together on their porch as the sun set over the ranch they had built together. The land stretched out before them, dotted with cattle and horses, buildings and fences, and all the infrastructure of a successful operation. In the distance, they could see smoke rising from Thomas's house and Samuel's house, signs of life and continuity. "We did well, did we not?" Xavier said quietly, his hand finding Sarah's. "We did very well," Sarah agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "I have no regrets," Xavier continued. "Not a single one. Every decision, every challenge, every moment has been worth it because I got to spend it with you." Sarah squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar calluses and strong bones beneath weathered skin. "The same is true for me." "You saved my life that day in Moab, Xavier. Not just physically, but in every way that matters. You gave me hope when I had none, love when I felt unworthy of it, and a family when I thought I would only ever have Emma. I cannot imagine what my life would have been without you." "You would have survived," Xavier said with conviction. "You are the strongest person I have ever known, Sarah. You would have found a way." "Perhaps," Sarah acknowledged, "but I am so very glad I did not have to. I am glad you stepped forward that day. I am glad you paid my debt and brought us home. I am glad you fell in love with me and made me your wife. Every single day I am glad." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, the stars emerging one by one overhead. Inside the house, they could hear Caroline and her family arriving for dinner, her children's voices raised in excitement. It would be a full table tonight, noisy and chaotic in the best way, multiple generations gathered together to share a meal and each other's company. "We should go in," Sarah said eventually. "Caroline will wonder where we are." "In a moment," Xavier said. "I want to sit here with you just a little longer, just the two of us, like it was in the beginning." So they stayed, hand in hand on the porch, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The wind carried the scent of sage and cattle, familiar and comforting. From somewhere nearby, a coyote called out to the rising moon. Eventually, they rose and went inside together, into the warm light and noise of family, into the life they had created through love and hard work and an unwavering commitment to each other. The door closed behind them, shutting out the night, enclosing them in everything they had built together over more than 30 years. Sarah looked around the crowded table, at the faces of her children and grandchildren, at her sister and Xavier beside her, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost physical. This was what she had stolen bread for all those years ago, not just to feed Emma's body but to give them both a future, to keep them alive long enough to find this moment. And Xavier, dear Xavier, had made it all possible, not just by paying her debt, though that had been the beginning, but by seeing her as worthy when she felt worthless, by offering her not just a job but a home, and eventually by loving her with a steadiness and devotion that had never wavered. As the evening wore on and the family lingered over dessert and coffee, Sarah caught Xavier's eye across the table. He smiled at her, that special smile he reserved just for her, and she smiled back, communicating in that wordless way they had developed over decades of marriage. They needed no words to understand each other, to express the depth of feeling they shared. Later, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Sarah and Xavier prepared for sleep in the room they had shared for so many years. The routine was familiar and comfortable, changing into night clothes, washing up, checking that the doors were locked and the lamps extinguished. When they finally lay down together, Xavier pulled Sarah close, fitting her body against his in the way they had slept for 3 decades. "I love you, Sarah Kane," he murmured into her hair. "I have loved you from the moment you took that bread from my hands with such stubborn pride. And I will love you until the day I die and beyond, if there is an beyond." "I love you too," Sarah whispered back. "My husband, my partner, my everything. You made all my dreams come true, Xavier, even the ones I did not know I had." They drifted off to sleep together, two souls so intertwined that it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. Outside, the ranch settled into night, all the animals and buildings and land they had worked so hard to maintain. But inside this room, in this bed, was the real heart of the Circle K, the love between Sarah and Xavier Kane, a love that had started with an act of mercy and grown into something that would echo through generations. And if Sarah dreamed that night of a dusty street in Moab, of a moment of desperation transformed by unexpected kindness, of a tall man with blue-green eyes who changed her world with simple words, well, that was a dream worth having. Because that dream had become her reality, and her reality was better than any dream could ever be. Years continued in their steady march, and Sarah and Xavier grew old together with grace and dignity. They celebrated their 40th anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, the house overflowing with family who existed because two desperate people had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. Thomas took over the ranch completely when Xavier retired at 68, and he ran it with the same integrity and care his father had shown. Caroline became the head teacher at the Moab school, respected throughout the county for her dedication to education. Samuel's horse breeding operation grew into a thriving business that supplied animals throughout the Utah Territory and beyond. Emma, now in her 60s herself, remained close to Sarah, and they spent many afternoons together, two old women who had survived so much and gained so much more. They would sit with their needlework or their grandchildren, sharing memories and laughter, grateful for every day they had been given. When Sarah turned 70, Xavier threw her a party that brought people from miles around. Old friends and neighbors, former ranch hands, townspeople who remembered the shy young woman who had come to Moab with nothing and built a legacy of love and family. Sarah was overwhelmed by the outpouring of affection, realizing only then how many lives she had touched simply by living her own life with kindness and integrity. Xavier made a speech that evening, his voice still strong despite his 72 years. Most of you know the story of how I met my wife. She was caught stealing bread to feed her sister, and I paid her debt. But what you might not know is that she has been repaying me every day since, not with money but with love and partnership and unwavering support. She has made me a better man, a better father, and a better neighbor. She has built a family and a home that will last long after we are gone. Sarah, my love, happy birthday. May we have many more years together. The crowd applauded, and Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as Xavier kissed her gently. "You old fool," she whispered affectionately, "making me cry in front of everyone." "You love it," Xavier teased, and she had to admit he was right. They had a few more good years after that, years of contentment and peace. They watched their grandchildren grow and their great-grandchildren arrive. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays and holidays, always at the center of an ever-expanding family that revered them both. When Xavier passed away quietly in his sleep at the age of 78, Sarah grieved deeply, but not hopelessly. She had known this day would come, had prepared herself as much as one can prepare for such a loss. She took comfort in knowing he had lived a full, happy life, that he had died peacefully in his own bed surrounded by family, and that they had been blessed with far more years together than many couples ever received. At his funeral, the church was packed with people whose lives he had touched. Sarah sat in the front row, flanked by her children and Emma, and listened as person after person stood to share stories of Xavier's kindness, his fairness, his integrity. She had known he was a good man, of course, but hearing others confirm it made her proud and sad and grateful all at once. She lived another 5 years after Xavier's death, spending her time with family and taking joy in each new generation. She never remarried. How could she, when she had already experienced the great love of her life? Instead, she carried Xavier in her heart, talking to him sometimes when she was alone, feeling his presence in the house they had shared and the land they had worked together. On a warm spring afternoon, 2 months past her 78th birthday, Sarah sat on the porch of the main house with Emma beside her. The two sisters watched the ranch go about its business, cattle moving in the distance, horses in the corrals, Thomas and his sons working on a fence line. "It has been a good life, has it not?" Emma said quietly. "It has been a wonderful life," Sarah agreed. "Far better than we had any right to expect." "Do you ever think about that day, when you stole the bread?" "Sometimes," Sarah admitted. "I think about how scared I was, how certain I was that everything was ending. And then Xavier stepped forward and everything changed." "He loved you so much," Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. "And you loved him. That love created all of this." She gestured at the ranch, at the family scattered across it. "Yes," Sarah said simply. "It did." They sat in comfortable silence, two old women who had started with nothing and ended with everything that mattered. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sarah felt a deep peace settle over her. She had lived well, loved well, and left a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. That night, Sarah went to bed in the room she had shared with Xavier, in the bed where they had slept together for so many years. She could almost feel him there beside her, his warmth and presence as real as they had been in life. She closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep with a smile on her face, dreaming of a tall man with blue-green eyes who had once paid her debt, and in doing so, given her everything. She passed peacefully in her sleep, and when her family found her the next morning, they knew she had gone to join Xavier, her partner and love for more than 40 years. They grieved, but they also celebrated, knowing that Sarah had lived exactly the life she wanted, surrounded by love until the very end. Sarah was buried beside Xavier on a hillside overlooking the Circle K, under a stone that read Sarah Fitzgerald Kane, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She lived with courage and loved with her whole heart. The funeral was attended by hundreds, all testifying to the impact she had made. And in the years that followed, the story of Xavier and Sarah Kane became something of a legend in the territory. People told their children and grandchildren about the woman who was caught stealing bread, and the rancher who paid her debt and gave her a home, and how that simple act of kindness had blossomed into one of the great love stories of their time. It became a reminder that mercy and compassion could change lives, that everyone deserved a second chance, and that true love could be found in the most unexpected places. The Circle K continued to thrive under Thomas's management, and eventually passed to his children and grandchildren, remaining in the Kane family for generations. But it was always understood that the ranch's real foundation was not land or cattle or money, but the love between Xavier and Sarah, two people who had found each other when they both needed it most and built something beautiful together. Emma lived another 3 years after Sarah's death, surrounded by her own large family, and she never stopped telling the story of her sister's courage and the man who had saved them both. When she died at 81, she was buried near Sarah and Xavier, the three of them together even in death as they had been in life. The legacy they left behind was not measured in acres or dollars, but in the generations of family who followed, in the values of kindness and integrity they had instilled, and in the story that continued to inspire long after they were gone. It was a legacy built on a foundation of love, started with a simple act of paying a debt, and sustained through decades of partnership and devotion. And somewhere in whatever comes after this life, Sarah and Xavier were together again, their love transcending even death, eternal and unbreakable as it had always been. They had started with nothing but hope and had built everything that mattered, and in the end, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.